Welcome to Career Tools. This week, how to predict and answer interview questions. The questions this cast answers are: how do I predict what interview questions I'll be asked? How do I make sure I have answers to interview questions? And how do I read a job ad?
This week's Career Tools guidance is brought to you by Roadmap, the new Manager Tools application module that will walk you step by step through rolling out the Trinity, one-on-ones and feedback. Or if you've already rolled out the Trinity, if you're already a fully functioning Manager Tools manager, you'll be able to measure and map your one-on-ones and your feedback. And if you're a director or above, give you insight into the managers beneath you and their rollout and how they're doing. Please come see it. October 2nd is launch.
Kate, this is one of, I think, the superpowers that a job applicant, someone looking for a new role, can have. And it's to be able to read a job advertisement and predict what the questions are going to be based on what's in the advertisement. And there's a lot kind of between the lines. And yet the company tells you what's important in the role, because if it wasn't important, they wouldn't put it in the ad, right? They're spending dollars on, it's not quite the same as when they were in newspapers, and yet you used to have to pay by line. But, on the web, you can put as much as you like. But still, someone's got to write it. Someone has got to think about what's important. And that's what goes into the job ad. So we're going to give everybody an example in this cast. And we're going to work through it and show everybody how we work out what the questions are going to be and how we work out what the answers to those questions should be. And if you have a license, I would follow along with the show notes. There's going to be lots of lists and lots of description in this that it would be helpful for you to be able to see what's going on if you have a license. If you don't have a license, go to the website, press products, and then find personal license. And there's lots more things that you get with a license than show notes, but it would be really helpful to have show notes for this.
Yeah, because we've got a lot to cover, right? We've got 5 parts here. We're going to conduct an analysis of the job and the posting, list the traits from the ad and the posting. We're going to add the traits that relate to the role, create behavioral interview questions from that, list our experiences, and then turn that into an answer. So we're covering a lot. So yeah, the show notes will be really helpful, and licenses are always really helpful. So that's exciting. We've got some cool stuff coming on our licenses. So that'll be good.
Yeah, we have. Roadmap is coming.
So first, we're going to conduct an analysis of the job and the post, right?
Mm-hmm.
The ad and the post, these things that we find online, are there really good sources of information about what they're looking for, what the company is searching for in a new hire? Even if it's just a list of requirements, what they're telling you is this is what's important to the company about this particular role in this job. They're literally describing the perfect candidate. And we know that intellectually. We often know that because sometimes you compare yourself to the list and you think, oh, gosh, they're really looking for the perfect person. But that doesn't always translate for us into the next step. And so this is one of those things where once we talk about it, you might think, oh, gosh, well, of course, that makes total sense. Think about it. If the ad describes the perfect candidate, what are they going to ask in the interview? They're going to ask, how well do you match up to this perfect candidate idea? They're going to ask questions that help them to discern whether or not you've got the skills, the traits, the abilities, the experience that the perfect candidate would have. And those questions are the list of questions that the interviewer has or should have for this interview. And most people, they would say, hey, interview questions are either a prescribed list that the company asks, right? Just like, hey, the company has this list, or they're random. But honestly, for a good hiring manager, they're neither. They're really specific questions that ask and allow him or her to assess your skills against the ones that they need. I mean, that's what interviewing is for, to say, hey, do you have any experience here? Can you share something with us, these behaviors, these traits that would highlight whether or not you meet our requirements as a candidate? And the list, that perfect candidate list, that job ad, the posting, this will tell you what questions will be asked if you just do a little bit of analysis. And that's what we're going to talk about today.
Right. So we're going to show you how to do the analysis and turn the job ad into a list of questions that the hiring manager is likely to ask. So we found an example ad for a program manager to show you exactly how this is done. This is a real ad from Monster. I went out and found one that worked as an example for us. So this is how the ad reads. We are looking for a program manager for the Kronos implementation project for 20,000 employees. The essential functions for this position include experienced program manager with 7 years of experience managing large, multi-site, multi-language, complex IT programs. The ability to deliver presentations to senior executives. Kronos application experience, a plus. HR and payroll experience, a plus. Basic qualifications, a bachelor's degree is required. So they're looking for a program manager who has a lot of experience with big implementation projects and some experience with the area in which they're doing this implementation, which sounds like it's HR and payroll kind of area.
Mm-hmm.
So the first thing we're going to do is list the traits from the ad. So what we're doing is we are looking at the ad and looking at every word which describes an experience, a trait, a skill that this person needs. And as an aside, you probably did this when you did your first application, right? Most people don't actually think about what the interview questions are going to be until they have an interview. And that's sensible, right? You don't want to waste any time. And so you look at the ad, you think, oh, I'm qualified, you send your resume in, and then you get the interview call and you think, okay, now I've got to do what Wendy and Kate are telling me about finding out the interview questions. And often the ad has been taken down. And so you can't see what it was you applied for. It's really frustrating. So if you're making applications or if you're sending your resume for things, make sure that you do a screen print or print to PDF, the actual ad that you're applying to, because you'll need that for this stage, and sometimes it's been taken down.
Mm-hmm. So we look at each part of the job description, and we pick out anything that either describes what the person will do or describes the experience that the candidate might need. Even in a short job description, this could be 20 or more items. If you're really looking, if you're focusing on, this ad. So in this case, our list starts with program manager. The ad asks for an experienced program manager, and it's telling us, therefore, that the ideal candidate will have that experience as a program manager. We can be pretty certain that the hiring manager is going to ask questions about our experience in that area. That's why it's first on the list.
A program manager, for those of you who don't know, is just a project manager with lots of projects. So a company might be rolling out a new system worldwide, and in each country, they'd have a project manager who was focused on that project, and then the program manager is their functional boss. So a program manager usually manages project managers, and usually manages more than one project. So what's next?
So we have program manager, we have project manager right at the top of the list. Good. Now, the ad also tells us that this is an implementation project. So we can infer, based on what the ad's telling us, that the hiring manager will ask questions about our experience, the candidate's experience with implementation projects. Implementation projects are a little bit different from other projects because they require bringing something into existence. They're not necessarily more complex or have more moving pieces than other projects, but they do have a different flavor. There's a different end result. So the fact that the company is telling us this in the ad really means that they're looking for someone who has completed implementation projects before. So it's not just enough to say, okay, we're going to manage a project, we're a program manager, but we're also going to put implementation projects on our list because it's a certain kind of project, and the flavor change there will make for some interesting questions. And if we have experience in that area, it would be really helpful and really to our benefit to highlight that for the interviewer.
That's a really good point.
Yeah. So program manager and then implementation project. And then next is this 20,000 employees part. That's a big project. That's massive. So as a candidate, we really want to have completed a big project before. And maybe it's not as big as 20,000, but something big that affects, at least 100 or 200 people. This is just another hint that this is a big job. They note that they want 7 years experience in managing large, multi-site, multinational, complex IT programs. And each of these descriptions adds another layer, another flavor. So multi-site, okay, there's probably some travel in there or remote work. Multi-language could mean English to Spanish, or gosh, there's a million different language things that could be. It could be Italian. It could be Spanish in Mexico, which is different than Spanish in Spain. And so we need to consider those things. And we put each of these on our list. So we're creating this list, and the full list. And again, guys, if you have a license, you have some show notes, it's probably helpful for you to follow along. The full list here is program manager, implementation project, 20,000 employees, 7 years experience managing large, multi-site, multi-language, complex IT programs, presentations to senior executives, Kronos, HR and payroll experience, and finally, bachelor's degree. That's a big list. Imagine having all this data going in.
Yeah, wouldn't it be amazing to be in an interview and know that those are the things that people are going to ask you about? That would make me feel so much more confident.
I would feel great about that. I would feel so good. You just feel so much better.
That isn't everything, though. There's more. Wait, there's more. So what we're going to do is add the traits that relate to that role. So what's in the job ad is what's important to the company. But as a person who works in that area or is qualified to do this job, you know that there are more skills that are going to be important to be successful in this role. And any of us can do this. We've explained as we've gone along what different terms have meant, because we don't know that everybody understands all of the terms or has come across all of the terms while you're listening to us. But if you're looking at an actual job ad that you're qualified for, then it's probably all familiar terms to you, and it won't take you long to make that list. But you also know there's other things that make people successful in your role. So let's say we're a software engineer and we're going for a software engineering manager job. That's pretty common. So as a software engineer, you have had good bosses and bad bosses. And you know that good bosses are able to communicate well, right? If any of us think of a boss that we've had that we've really enjoyed working for, that we've been really successful working for, someone who was what we would call a good boss, they always have really good communication skills. They build relationships with their team, with their peers, with their own bosses. They're creative, they're able to focus on what's important, and so on. Like, there's a long list of what makes a good boss. And you know what this list is just by your experience of being around these people. This is where you pull in your experience and you add those traits to the list. Now, just because they weren't in the job ad, they're often soft skills, and they're often things that aren't very easily tested in an interview. And that's why they rarely end up on a job ad. But your experience will tell you that in order to do this job, there's some other things I need, and I can put that list together.
Imagine not only having the list of what they want to hear about, but being able to contribute things that you know will make you successful in your interview with your answers. It's solid gold. It's just a step above. It makes you the candidate who stands out. And this is not natural, guys. It's not going to be really easy the first time you do it. And so if you're struggling, if you find it hard, one good way to get better at it, because sometimes we want to practice, is go to Monster or Indeed or any one of these job posting sites. Look at a bunch of job descriptions for jobs that have the same title as the one that you're interviewing for. This should provide you with some inspiration. It will help you. And it will kind of help you to see themes, things like that, to make your list a little more specific and a little maybe more targeted. If you're still struggling, if that's not good enough, come to the forums on Manager Tools. Surely there's somebody there who's willing to help.
There always is.
There always is. And not only that, but guess what? They might be a hiring manager. Wouldn't you love to hear from a hiring manager on the forums? Well, these are the kind of things I'm looking for. And if you could include that in your answer, I'd love to hear about it.
That would be wicked.
Let's go back, right?
Yeah.
Don't get too excited.
No. Back to our example program manager. So this role is going to need a lot of communication. We've already said great bosses have really good communication skills. But a role like this, where you're managing multiple projects in multiple countries, in multiple languages, communication is massive. They're going to be communicating with project managers, with staff, with stakeholders, with finance, with HR, perhaps with outside consultants, with contractors and suppliers, potentially with customers, and all sorts of other people. These people, this program manager, when he gets into this job, is going to be non-stop people communication. So communication, relationship building and networking skills are going to be essential. And so we can go ahead and we add those to our list.
A program manager usually controls the budget, or if not, has a bunch of input into the budget for the project. So we're going to add budget management. Budget is not the only resource that the project manager will need. There's people and equipment and time and stuff like that. So we'll also add resource management. The program manager will probably have all the project managers reporting into them. Remember, the program manager is a project manager with a bunch of projects. In big projects like this, the structure may be different, but this role will definitely require managing a team. So let's add that. If you're the program manager, you can probably add 10 to 20 more essential traits or experiences, characteristics, things like that a successful program manager would need. Whatever the job is that you're interviewing for, you can probably do this too, because you know from experience what makes people in the role you're applying for successful. At least in general terms, you've seen someone doing this well, or maybe someone doing it poorly. Trust yourself. Trust your instincts. If you've been doing this job or you're familiar with this job, you'll have been picking this up in your role, even if you're not aware of it. So trust your judgment, trust your instincts. You can't know exactly, but it's okay if you're 80% of the way there. It's okay if you can get most of the way there. Because remember, the other candidates, guys, they're probably not even doing this. This is already putting you head and shoulders above the other candidates. And in that case, having more, even if it's not perfect, right? Don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. So if you can get some of the way there, that's a win. The list is getting long, right?
It is. So now our list looks like this. Program manager, implementation project, 20,000 employees, 7 years experience managing large, multi-site, multi-language, complex IT programs, presentations to senior executives, Kronos, HR and payroll experience, bachelor's degree, communication, relationship building, networking skills, team management, budget management, and resource management. And what we've done is we have each of those little phrases on a different line. So program manager is on a line, implementation project is on a line, 20,000 employees is on a line. And there's a reason for doing that. We really atomized the list where we could have amalgamated it. So instead of putting things together, we're pulling things apart. For example, communication, relationship building, and networking are all similar skills. They're all kind of based around dealing with people. And so you could put them all together. You could assume that someone who's good at communication is probably good at relationship building and networking. And that is probably true. But that doesn't mean that the company won't ask 3 different questions about those 3 different skills. So we want to keep them apart so that, one, we're answering very specifically the questions that we think are going to be asked. And 2, if you have more examples of something, it's better in the interview. Like having more examples of any skill is good. And this way we're going to do questions for each of them and you'll come up with answers for each of them. And that means you'll have more to pull on when you're in the interview.
Yeah. And at Manager Tools, we suggest behavioral interviewing and from a core set of questions. Having extra examples of these traits and things like that would allow you to have different examples each time you hear the same question. If you interview with 3 or 4 people, they all ask you the same behavioral interviewing question, but you have 2 or 3 examples to pull from, then you have a way to say, not only have I done this, but I've done it a bunch of times. So you're actually, again, setting yourself up as a stellar candidate. So we've got our list, and now we're going to create these behavioral interviewing questions because that's what all good companies use, right?
Right. And even if they don't use behavioral questions, having practiced them, you will have answers for other kind of questions.
Yeah. Doing it the other way, fitting non-behavioral answers into behavioral questions is difficult.
It's way harder.
It's way harder. And you're already on the spot.
Right. And a behavioral question asks you for an example. And so if you haven't thought of an example, it's really hard, like you said, on the spot to think of an example, a good example of when you did something. Whereas if you have the behavioral answer and they just say, how would you do this? Then you can easily say, well, actually, I have done this and this is how I did it.
Absolutely. We're going to set up some behavioral interviewing questions to practice, to get prepared. And in case you're not familiar, behavioral interviewing questions consist of 3 parts. the lead, which hints to the candidate, you as the candidate, about what we're looking for, the question, which is always open-ended, and then the third part is the actual behavior that the interviewer is looking for. You don't have to get all three parts to be able to work with your predictions. You don't have to have all three parts for this portion because, again, you're drafting responses. So you don't have to have the exact question, but we want the skill that we're looking for and tell me about a time. We're kind of creating like draft question. Again, because we won't know their exact questions, but the flavor of them based on what we've got, the data we've gathered and the analysis that we're doing is probably going to be pretty solid. And so we can prepare our answers in a way that will make us better prepared without knowing the exact question that they're going to ask us.
And behavioral questions, as I just said, always ask for an example. So the classic way of asking for an example is, tell me about a time when. Tell me about a time when you had to deal with a grumpy customer. Tell me about a time when you had to communicate with a customer. Tell me about a time when you had to be accurate in your reporting. And often, if you go to a company and they're using behavioral interview questions, all of the questions will start with "Tell me about a time when." Mm-hmm. Now, there are some variations, but we can use "Tell me about a time when" to predict these questions. So what we take is the list of skills that we have been building, and we put "Tell me about a time when" in front of them. So, tell me about a time when you were a program manager. Tell me about a time you managed an implementation project. Tell me about a time when you managed a project affecting 20,000 employees. You might not have a perfect example for that, but you might have 10 or 15,000. Tell me about a time when you managed a large project. Tell me about a time when you managed a multi-site project. Do these questions start to sound familiar? If any of you are program managers, this list of questions, I didn't realize it until I read it out loud, are exactly the questions that I would ask if I was interviewing for a program manager.
Yeah, they should sound familiar. So we start with adding "tell me about a time." Then we're going to put "successfully" in the sentence. So tell me about a time when you were a successful project manager, or tell me about a time when you managed a large project successfully. Tell me about a time when you managed a complex project successfully. Tell me about a time when you managed an implementation project successfully. So this is the next step, right? Tell me about a time when you were a project manager, and then tell me about a time when you were a successful project manager. And we can say with confidence that at least some of these questions will be asked in the interview. Even if the interviewer doesn't use behavioral questions, they're going to ask about these same skills because these are the most important skills to the job. Again, because this is from the job description, which is a list of the perfect candidates' skills and traits and characteristics and abilities. They're the most important skills in the job. So you could almost certainly use this list as a basis for the other jobs that you're interviewing for as well, because those important skills will be similar to this list.
Right. I imagine that you start a job hunt and you start with the first ad, you start your list and you practice the questions to that list. And then when you see the next job ad, you add to that list. And by the time you've interviewed for 6 or 7 roles, your list has maybe 50 things on it. And for every single one, you have an example of when you've done that thing successfully. And if you had that, you won't need 6 interviews because you're going to blow them out of the water on the first one.
Absolutely. And it's okay if we've done this for a few job descriptions and now we've got more than 8 or 10 questions. It's far better to have more and have leftover answers than to have practiced fewer questions and be without an answer in your interview. Better to be over prepared.
Right. And if you're a hiring manager and thinking, I could do this for the job I'm hiring for, and you have a license, as we already discussed, you can use the interview creation tool to do this, or you can use the interview creation tool to predict what questions you're going to get in an interview, because basically the interview creation tool asks for the list of skills and then it puts together behavioral questions that go with those skills. And so if you want the magic, the interview creation tool will help you as a hiring manager or as a candidate.
Yeah, so much magic.
Yes.
Okay, so we've made the list of questions, and now we're going to list our experience. Now that we've deduced the possible interview questions, we've made a strong analysis of the description, and we've set up some interviewing questions. We're going to practice answering them. And in order to do that, We're going to list all the experience that we have that relates to that question, along with the details, along with a strong list of the details. It doesn't have to be pretty, guys. When I was interviewing for manager tools, I just had note cards, big ones, right? Like 3x5, big ones, hundreds of them. As long as you can read your note cards, you can use as many abbreviations or shortcuts or shorthand as you need.
So you get out your career management document. If you don't have one, search for it on the website. We'll tell you how to do it, and your resume. And then you start a list of times when you have shown a certain skill. So the first question we had was, tell me about a time when you were a successful program manager. So underneath that, you might write something like DBCom Limited, that was the name of the company you worked for, program manager, 5 projects, 2 international point of sale, 1 national point of sale and stock management, and 2 national resource management. 15,000 employees across Europe. Budget EUR, budget 900,000 euros, 8 directs, total team of 90 plus 50 contractors, 16-month program, on time, on budget, in scope. So that's just a 4-line description of the important things, the important measures of being a program manager. So this is just for you to help you put together the information that you're going to need in order to make a good example. That's why it's kind of bitty, and that's why it doesn't have to be nice prose. It can just be a list. Here's another one. So Sunshine Limited, program manager for 3 projects, 2 international point of sale and 1 stock management, 1 HR and recruitment, 50,000 employees across Europe, budget 65,000 euros, 6 directs, total team of 50, 10-month program, on time, on budget, on scope. So these 2 times that this person that we're imagining has been a program manager, that he's done 2 big projects, lots of people, multinational. So he's hit more than one of the things on the list that he knows he's going to be asked about. He's got 2 really good examples of when he's done that.
Mm-hmm. Another one that we might do is tell me about a time you managed a team successfully. So that would sound like this. DB.com Limited, right? The name of the place. Total team, 90 plus, 50 contractors. One-on-ones, feedback, coaching, and delegation according to Model Learned. 80% employee engagement on Gallup. Most successful manager on 360 Review. Turnover 5%. All managers who moved on to bigger roles.
And that is the same example as we used for the first one. It's the same number of people. That's how you can connect those. So it's just a different way of describing the same job, but bringing out a different aspect of it to answer the question.
If you have the interview series, or if you want to get the interview series, we break this down a lot in that cast, in those, in that product. So you can ensure that you're always giving a good example of your accomplishment and not just saying what you did. And you can also ensure that you prioritize your examples so that you always use the most relative or impressive example. And we call this the general store exercise. So it's in that interview series project or product if you want to go and use that as well.
If you want some more depth.
Yeah.
And finally, we turn it into an answer. So we turn the experience that we've just established into an interview answer. And to do that, we start by answering the question and then giving the detail of the answer. So, for example, if I said, tell me about a time when you were a successful program manager, what would you say, Kate?
In my current role, I've been program managing 5 projects. We're currently on time, on budget, and in scope. The program affects 1,500 employees across Europe with a 900,000 euro budget. The program consists of 5 interrelated projects, 2 for international point of sale across Europe, 1 point of sale and stock management here in the UK, and the implementation of resource management in 2 new countries, Slovenia and Croatia. Let me tell you some detail about it. XYZ, I believe I have been successful because ABC.
Easy. All you're doing is putting into prose what you listed before.
Yeah.
And when somebody says, tell me about a time when you've been a program manager, starting that way is amazing. Okay, let's do another one. Tell me about a time you managed a team successfully.
Of course. In my last role, I achieved 80% employment engagement in a Gallup survey, and I was the most successful manager in my group on our annual 360 review. I was managing a team of 90 with an additional 50 contractors on the team. I only had a 5% turnover rate, and all of those who were turned over were all managers who I had worked with to enable them to be promoted. In practice, I managed my team using a combination of one-on-ones, feedback, coaching, and delegation. Let me tell you a bit about those tools.
And we haven't told you the whole answer. We just wanted to give you an idea of how you turn those lists into the beginning of an answer, because there are other casts about answering specific questions. There's also the interview series if you want to get that. So it has more depth in it. But from this, you should be able to get from the job ad to the interview questions to your answers, which is, even if I say so myself, pretty cool.
It is really cool. It's really cool. This is just, it will help you, and it will help you feel more confident as a candidate as well.
Predicting interview questions is actually surprisingly easy when you realize that the company is telegraphing what's important to them in the job ad. There is nothing difficult about what we just did. It's just that most people don't know to do it, and even if they did, they wouldn't put the effort in. So, you know, once you know what the questions are going to be, you can set about creating and practicing really good answers to them. And I have been able to tell candidates who've really prepared for an interview and candidates who are just coming to the interview and they've read the job ad and they've maybe looked at your website, but they don't really know how their experience fits with what you need. And when I recognize a candidate who's been rehearsed, I don't think, oh my gosh, that person rehearsed. I think this person really wants this job because they're really making an effort to show me that they're good for this job. So don't worry about rehearsing too much. Don't rehearse a speech, right? You still have to be able to have a conversation, but don't worry about doing too much work towards an interview because there is no such thing as too much work.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Kate.
Thanks, Wendy.
That's it for this week. We'll be back next week.